It's actually a lot.
They do.
I can't wait to see the new chamber. That'll be nice, wouldn't it?
Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, ready?
No.
Okay, good evening, welcome to the housing overview. That's 7:02, and I would like to start this meeting. Councillor Lynn Worrell, and I am the chair of this committee. I'd like to remind everyone present this meeting being recorded publication on the council website. As this meeting is being held in the beehive instead of the council chamber, there is a time limit, venue which is 30. The items on the agenda are not concluded by 9:30. We will adjourn this meeting for the next ONS meeting. Go to that. Apologies for absence. I think that we've got a full team tonight, so thank you everybody for that. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to welcome Lucy as our SEN services officer tonight, and to wish Grace
Yes.
all sorts of successes in her new venture. She's been a great officer, so I just wanted to go on record that she's for us and well.
Yeah.
Item 2 on the agenda is the minutes. I move that the minutes held on the 11th of January to be approved as record.
Yeah.
Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? They're approved. I have got one that has arisen that I'd probably like to talk about the minutes, if that's okay. So that would be on, we agreed that the transfer of land to the Culver Centre, that we would like it to be ratified independently. We didn't ask the cabinet for us, for the council to be able to agree that. What we asked is that it would be ratified at Acton Council, and so we put our words forwards and it went to cabinet, and I've watched the recording and our words were not read out at the meeting. It was dismissed, and that there's been a conversation about it. So I put a call in on that decision, and that call in's been turned down, and I have a meeting with Matt Bolton next week, because I feel that we met all items in the that item. I know that as a committee felt pretty strongly about not giving control to two people. So all I can say is that, you know, we didn't get anywhere with that, but I am going to that goal.
That's something then we might have to bring up the constitution.
And I've asked to go on the constitution workshop. Yeah, so go on the constitution workshop because something's fundamentally wrong that's working at the. That is my point.
Few things got to be changed.
Absolutely, but I have been asked to go on by across the chamber as well.
We'll build together then.
They just didn't even hear it. Our statement that we agreed the next morning got read out in cabinet. Matt Bolter said that he had a statement and it wasn't ready.
I don't think it was dismissed. I think there was something spoke about. I think it's because it was ratified at a full council back about that land. So I think if we want to have a good argument, then we've got to go back in the agendas and see what happened at full council back.
And also they dismissed it. Absolutely. I was saying that we're going to agree here, and officers tell us isn't necessarily what.
I don't want to do is stop that.
Absolutely.
Because that needs to go ahead, that Culver Centre.
But we need to, but we do need to also know that Scrutiny's got a functional role in the council. absolutely. Right, it wasn't here.
Yeah, thank you. I know just to say, 2 years ago, and it's a specific point. Henry seems to be she's still. You don't want to accept that social have a role challenging, practically challenging. To note, perhaps comment, I'm only not going to the end to challenge what do we take?
Hours of work. John.
Yeah, I quite agree with that, but I do think that, and I'm one of those that sits as chair on quite a few things, and if I've got something to say, I will go to cabinet and speak, and not getting you in, but I think we should have made the opportunity to go to cabinet and make our point. So, or deputise somebody to go for you.
Because I was on the, I
Yes.
was on a meeting with you that very next evening.
Yeah,
About, we had a peer review and I've been asked to attend the peer review.
yeah.
I couldn't be in two places.
No, and I think we as a committee, we've either got to, the chair's got to deputise someone,
Yeah.
perhaps your vice chair or something,
Yeah.
and to go for you. So I think we've got to, overview and scrutiny has got to make a representation at cabinet.
I agree.
And I know that I've made my representation quite often, you know, so you have to go there to tell them how you feel.
Absolutely,
You know.
that hopefully it will get picked
Yeah.
up in the constitution.
Yeah, oh, if it will.
Okay, let's move on because we've had.
I was just hearing from the colleagues on poll that the sound isn't good for them. I'm not entirely sure what you can do to the laptop.
Move the laptop forward, yeah, I mean, in terms of the sound, it's,
Is it all coming off a laptop microphone?
yeah, it's all being picked up from the laptop and there's nothing really we can do about that.
All I would suggest, my apologies, because I'm guilty of being to the chair.
If that makes
That's
a
better,
difference.
Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit better. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I can hear that. It's just sort of breaking up a little bit, so I'll just listen very carefully. So, but it just sort of breaks up a little bit on a couple of words. So I think it'll be okay.
Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on to item 3, and that is an agreed no urgent items of business. Right? A briefing note was circulated on the private housing stock condition survey. Did anybody have any comments on? Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No. Moving on to the first substantive item, which is item 5, CO1 redevelopment update, pages 15 to 24 of the agenda. Can I ask Keith Andrews to present the report?
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. So you'll note that this is a collaborative report, presentation of the paper, but we've got a couple of others that were involved in drafting the paper. Jones, who's there remotely, and so all the other colleagues stepping into the questions as needed. So the first thing to say is that this report is proposed redevelopment of the existing council civic state, COI offices, really with that, and it's a redevelopment of 82, potentially 82 new homes on that site. So the existing building knocked down and new homes. Just the basic. You will hear me refer to the fact that this report is quite an early report. There will be the need before we get into the stage of viewing contractors to have further. So this is just an early report. I'll probably refer to that as a note. Okay, so And just to start with, as I say, it's 82 units. And this size of project has been through some analysis that shows that size of scheme is both financially viable and has the best fit with planning requirements. There's always that juggling act to look at to make sure we pick out all of the relevant finance, how it sits with that planning policy. The existing use of the CL1, I think, is now, as we offices, I think, is now finished. I think all the occupants, tenants are now out. And this proposed scheme, it needs the council's aspirations in terms of not just building a building, but place shaping. And it also provides a financial benefit of £2.8 million to the general fund, support of the civic extension. They're the sort of the drivers behind. So I think it's worth also mentioning that in terms of the design, it recognises, and the process overall recognises the need and relate to respond to the fact that the Seabrook Rise estate quite close by, and ensure it's compatible in terms of overall scale. So I'm going to touch now on to some of the issues and options. So the first one there at item 3.2 is consideration for refurbishment new offices. That was considered not an appropriate use, not suitable use, due to the buildings and fabric was life, and also demand from us. So I'll now discuss briefly some of the options for the residential accommodation approach. So we did look at a viability for a market sale, private rented sector development, and they're not financially viable. Touch on that a little further along the section. So as I say, we're at an early stage of design. 3.4 and the following paragraphs, it does give quite a lot of detail there about some of the design processes that we've been going through. So the current stages that we're working through the design development, and we've appointed consultants to take us through that. And one point of note is that we've appointed the same architectural practice as with the civic extension project, so there's some consistency across the estate. So the next steps that we'll be moving on to, which we set out in detail in the report, is that we'll be looking for to refine the design. In the cost plan that will sit alongside the design plan. There'll be continued engagement with planners, and there'll be resident engagement with events, in person, online, by post, all the normal consultation and engagement activity, and all of that work will lead up to a planning application. They're the sort of next steps. There are acknowledged design and delivery risks, dependencies for this. And it's very obvious for those who know the location, that it's adjacent to the network rail line. There's a bridge running into the side of the site. So we know things like the demolition will be difficult, but it's entirely practical and possible. It's subject to a detailed risk assessment method statement. Some people would know it as a safe system of work. So all of that stuff is entirely possible. And of course, schemes on such constrained sites, with some frequency. So that we'll also acknowledge the fact there's we're working through a detailed assessment of how CO1 and CO2, the two existing blocks of council accommodation, how they interrelate, and we're looking at the power strategies as they need to be split up and divided. But above all of the new work will be existing building control, planning requirements, and sustainability. I'll then touch on to the financial viability bit. So this is where, if there are particular questions and challenges, then I'll ask people to step in and help with those. As I said, there's plan 2.8 million financial contribution to the general fund through the project. I mentioned that the design and cost plan is developing, as with all projects. It's an iterative process. It's quite early here. We know it's quite a tight site, so that's a challenge. And there may be, you know, in terms of public amenity space, sorry, private amenity space, public amenity space, we need to recognise all of that. And, you know, the current design recognises that we might have some undercroft parking. Clearly, it will require safety, fire safety and sprinkler systems and so on. On the page at 314, you have your page certainly in mind. So we've identified the cost at this point. So there's a provisional requirement on the client side. So that's all sort of design elements, all the testing, surveys, all the work through up to planning and beyond. 1.7 million, construction estimate of 21.6 million, and together with that, it's referred to as land costs, but that's the transfer of provision of money for the general fund. So the financial modelling was initially considered as a mix of sale and private rented, but the outcome of that is not financially viable to deliver the scheme as a private sector offering. The market sales option, so it was based particularly around evaluating through a TRL model, the Thurrock regeneration model, that has a lower return than a private sector company would have, and found not to be viable for TRL, and so therefore would certainly not be viable in terms of a market, because of the difference in return. The next section just touches on the private rented option, and again that was found through the financial analysis not to be a viable option like the TRL, so the same logic applies there. So in the light of those options, we approached it looking at the greater flexibility that the housing revenue account has, and that uses a sort of different financial model so that it reflects the costings over a 30-year period rather than a sort of more traditional development appraisal. So it looks across the costs of the income over a 30-year period as a housing revenue account model, and that does achieve viability. The long-term cash flows that come out of that 30-year appraisal set out on 3.23, and does do a very small surplus rate over that period. The last couple of bits I think to mention are that the income is set in the same way to the rental streams of other council projects to make viable and within the affordable housing definitions. There's right to buy receipts that are assumed renters. Currently we're assuming a maximum of 40% see if that's required. And the last point, just a note, is in relation to 3.29, where there's an indicative programme set out there. And as I said at the start, things will change. But what we're suggesting is that we would have construction starting in September 23. Plan the application summer of this year.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just like to say, I quite appreciated very clearly set out, very better about the challenges are very thanks Keith and everybody else. I've got two questions basically. It does feel that if you were actually, if you had complete freedom as to where you want to build, my first question then is, what safeguards are there in that is not a large black hole? Question number one, and question number two, the other concern I have, even at limited rents, the market, below market rent, something called dead. Even 80% of market rent is beyond a lot of people. What are we? How sure can we be that these flats will end up being thorough people? So what are the safeguards? How sure can we be these are actually going to be attractive proposition?
It has. So I think the first point is in relation to the finances. So I think I've set out that it is an iterative design process and cost plus. So at each, not to get to some technical bits, but at each REBA stage, each stage of a housing development, we'll have cost plans review as we progress through it. So we will know as the scheme develops, as we refine the cost plan. Now that may mean that something's cost more than we expected. It might mean that those provisional sums that we put in, because we just don't have that detail yet, so we put a provisional sum, may actually turn out to be more than required. So there is cost control through the cost consultants that we have on board, the project management processes that we have, so that at each stage we'll be able to review with our finance colleagues where the cost plan changes. So I think you can be assured that there is a close eye on how the project develops in terms of council finances. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there are, of course, risks with development. There always are. They change. Council's borrowing rate may change significantly in the next 30 years, and none of us know that. But we do keep an eye on the construction cost market, so that we are tracking that. Know how the prices are moving. Just that we just really likely to zero when the original restrictions that we require as strict as they are now. So that's what I picked up here. So how big an issue is it? That's sort of a tightly restricted side. What sort of collateral requirements to themselves add extra cost onto the building compared with if you could. So yeah, clearly it does bring on those extra challenges. That's the reason why we've got an experienced technical team, so that we can identify the risks with the contingencies. And in fairness, if we moved some miles just up the river towards the city, development of this sort of tightness on site, very, very free. So this may be a more of a newer challenging thing for us here in Thurrock. The consultant teams that we've got on board to support us are very familiar with those sorts of circumstances. So I think we can be confident in terms of our processes and the way that the projects will be looked at each stage. But we are controlling costs and we have room to manage it. The second question is in terms of the affordable rents element. Now I know that will probably help me out a bit in terms of the council's housing strategy. There is a basic fundamental point that we need a rental income to be able to afford to build the new homes. And I think the way that we've set out the rental level on which the appraisal is done, that is consistent with everything else is required, so that we can, in terms of the allocations policy, and then everyone will correct me, but the properties developed will be let through the council's allocation system, and all of the checks and balances in terms of the can and can't apply for housing set out in council policy to ensure that Thurrock are best served. The affordable rent 18 is that in the cost anyway. So the rental stream, the 30-year plan makes some fairly standard assumptions about the sorts of rental inflation and cost inflation that we would expect. So I think there's some notes within the paper that actually sets some of the financial parameters that's gone into the financial plan.
Was that in response to?
It was in
Mike,
response.
because I know that
Yeah.
Joy's weight is coming.
It was. I was just going to build a couple of points on what Keith had said, and actually I won't repeat the point about tight sites in the city or anywhere else, because of course that is very, very true. I was just going to make the point that both in terms of safeguarding that you don't have a black hole, and indeed the fact that you are making this for Thurrock people, actually the fact that you're doing in the end an HRA development is the key factor. A, because while costs might rise, you will have an infinite stream of demand, and you will have an infinite stream of revenue, either paid by people or significantly, of course, met by housing benefit taking the strain. And of course, then the other point is, as Keith's rightly said, your allocations will be through your allocation system. So nothing is without risk. Keith has quite properly said that costs can go up, but actually you are a great deal less at risk than you would be down the line.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think 3.13, Keith, where it says the site is technically challenging, being adjacent to a rail line. Well, I'm afraid if we go all over Thurrock, everything's being built. We've got flats on the back of the council offices that were built so close, you could probably see someone having a shower, possibly standing up there. So they were so close, yeah.
I do, where I live.
Never understood how that was built so close to the council offices, but I think, as we've said, we've got 7,000 sitting on the, waiting list for homes. Didn't want to mention Blackshot's flats, but it may be an ideal place to decamp people for while they come down. Well, Blackshot's had been passed now to go through, and they are the worst stage three. Sorry, people are actually living in terrible conditions.
Oh, no.
We don't seem to be addressing at the moment, but I think that might be an ideal, and I don't want to, because it's in my ward, but I think that may be an idea where we could do a good development and then get people back in to homes where they perhaps want to live, and that may be a good decamp place just for now. But then people might decide to go elsewhere, so it might be that. But I can't understand that technical challenging when you've got buildings all round. You've got Stamford, where an elderly people's complex has been built right next. I mean, watching the trains go like that, So if they wanted peace and quiet, they definitely haven't got it. They're right near a road and they're right near a train station. So, and we've got it in East Tilbury as well. People living right near a train station. So I think we've got it across the borough. If you look at what's going up in Lakeside, I was frightened to see what's going up in Lakeside, how close they are now to Lakeside itself. They seem to be going round and coming across now. So, yeah, so, and people would buy them probably. The only thing I'm really worried about is the car park underneath. Is that going to be for some of the people to use? And I'm looking at it from members' point of view now, because we have got to get still into the offices. So is there going to be just the car park that's there now, Keith, or is there going to be, obviously we can build back the other way underneath, because it was only a car park to start with, so I remember that. So
if I can just
Yeah.
address that
Thank you.
particular point, the current plans see no intention to use that under the CO2 building. Simply the scheme itself will be within its own footprint, and there will be car parking to be provided will be within the footprint of CR1.
I'm fine with that, thank you.
I just want to find out, I know you did talk about weighing the different options. Renting. About 82 flats. I guess to get one.
So I think that there's a different way of looking and appraising council housing development.
Yeah.
We can look at all the rent which has been coming in 30 years. We can borrow as a council, very low borrowing rates, and so that the way that is particularly appraised considers that all of those properties will largely remain within the council's housing stock. That is a more that's that particular way of appraising it. If we looked at it as a market concern, then we would not consider it over that period of time. A straight development appraisal looks at it as a project based around the construction time and then the period to sell. So there'll be a slightly different approach in terms of private rented sales. I think the paper sets out some detail within that, but because of the different profit margins, that obviously the council is not a profit-making organisation in terms of its rental stream, as a private sector entity, look for a healthy profit margin, a healthy yield on that. But they do get praised with a slightly different one, which is why we've come down to the route of the housing review account being the most financially viable.
My question is, property, just wondering the cost of maintenance. How do you work? Take that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. That's set out within the functional viability model that we use. And so there are lines in there for the average maintenance and management costs of the housing review account stock, again inflated in line. So that will rise and it will cost more in 30 years' time than it does now, in the same way that we expect rents to get higher. So, but those areas of the management and maintenance certainly are considered within the 30-year viability.
See what the choice is going to be like.
No, but we make best judgment on what the inflation factors will be, and that they're put into that viability. See, things can change. So, no one can tell us what it will be 30 years time. So we make the best professional judgment that we can.
So obviously, it's not going to be like what you're proposing, like renting it out. It's going to be more viable because it doesn't really give us the accurate information what we need to know.
I think it's the most accurate information that we can give at this point. As I say, we will continue to review the costings going forward, but it's the basis on which the council's housing revenue account is structured to have a business plan over many years. So it's a well-trodden path, is probably the best way to describe it, of looking at projects with the council's housing revenue account over those longer periods.
Yeah, just to be clear, Chair, I don't think we should leave that unanswered. It is a standard national methodology of assessing, as Keith says, housing revenue accounts. The uncertainty is figures will not be exactly as predicted, but it is not lacking information for you. It is the best, as Keith rightly said, it's the best way of assessing this. It assesses the cost of build, cost of maintenance, and the cost of management over that 30-year period, and this instance ends up with a surplus. So, just to be absolutely definitively clear, it is the best information available to you at the point in time.
Thank you.
Have you got a quick one on?
Yeah,
Because I can ask a question, yeah?
Just to agree with the Vice Chair, that we hammered upon that, totally accepted the methodology of that country, but it is, we are coming out of low interest, low inflation cycle, and as you've noticed, it's starting to shoot up. The best phrase for the next 2 years is that it's going to be starting.
So it's not a guess, Chair, it's a projection. And yes, of course, we're in a period of quite considerable inflation at the moment, but I am seeing appraisals already returning to 2.5% for years in the future. Short answer is we don't know what's going to happen. There is already indications that the immediate spike is turning down. So over 30 years, if you look back at the history of the previous 30 years, and look forward over 30 years, the chances are it will be bad. As I say, the one certainty is that the figures will not be exactly as they are on the
You can come in. I'm not going to make a speech. I think I'm just. All I want to say about these flats is that hopefully we learn something with what we've done before and what we've done. We don't build another lot of flats like we have built, because they're not fit for purpose, and we don't want these. Although they're going to be, is it 5 stories or?
It will potentially perhaps a little taller than the existing building.
Yeah. So as long as we learn that they've got to have drying rooms and they've got to have things that keep them mould free. So as long as we've gone into all those sort of things, I don't mind. I don't want the problems of 60 years ago coming back now, because what we've got is 60-year-old flats that shouldn't be there now. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah. Just one. If this all goes through,
Okay, so the
Maureen wants to be here when you.
So we do have within the reports that 3.29 there, an indicative programme. So we would hope that on that showing that we would be looking to make a start on site September 23. Completion 2 years later.
Okay, I think I want to start with talk about the elephant in the room, and that is on Monday night that the leader of the council will deal with BBC Essex. During that interview, he spoke about CO1 and the redevelopment. He announced that they were now plans to increase the number of flats from 82 to 94. That would be another 14 flats, which is a 15% increase in the numbers. Report tonight here does not cover any of that, and you can only assume that when Cabinet say they're going to do that is what they'll do. And he went on to say that it could even go higher and be over 100 flats, which would be a 20% increase. So what before us tonight is possibly not what we're getting. So I was expecting. So what does a 15% increase, you know, bearing in mind that on 2.2 it says the optimum level and number is what we're going to be building. A 15% increase due to figures and because I've put a lot of work into this, and then just to have it all blown out the water that actually this isn't the figures, and we've employed people and use the work so hard, and actually done a cabinet next week, and then it could be 100 flats we have not planned for and consultants.
So I think the best thing that I can say is that repeating what I said earlier is that is an iterative process. Things change over time. I thought that in front of you was Henry, like wood. But that is the basis that we can set. Other changes in terms of growth, the rental streams, cost sequence. Sitting here, I can't offer up any detailed analysis of what that would mean. That's a financial analysis.
So it'd have to come back here, like we can't, you know what I mean? Like it'd be like starting at square one again, wouldn't it? If it's going to be 100, this is a complete. If it's going to be 100, then that's a 20% rise if we changed. You know, and I think that we have to acknowledge that, you know, that a lot of work's gone to get this tonight, and you know, and it could be 20%, and it could be completely different, which would change the car parking. You couldn't have a roof garden. You couldn't have a block of flats with a roof garden on the top and put families up there. That'd be like chaos with kids chucking stuff over the roof.
It's a bit like having an outline planning. People will always come back for some more. Yeah. Even though it's an outline planning, they'll put in for more. Always. You know, they'll never come with
But
what's
this
on
is
the
the
plan.
HRA money.
Yes.
This isn't our money, Joy.
No, no.
This is HRA money.
Yeah.
We are playing with people's money here.
Yeah.
You know, it's not anybody else's purse. This is the HRA purse and our right to buy money. And I think that this should really, you know, it's probably not what's going to be now. And all, you know, how can it go to planning in June? It could be 100. When it's work's been done of that costing it on 82 and the optimum level was 82. Any of these officers?
Yeah, all I was really going to say is that I think I was quite clear at the start that this is an early stage report would be coming.
Another 20 on it. Because I think, yeah, okay.
I think I clearly didn't say that. But what I did say is that, you know, we will have to go back before we get to any factor. So, you know, things change. I'm sitting here, I'm not going to be able to tell you what differences. This is the report that we set before you entirely within your rights to challenge as yet.
Mike, can you help? What does 20% extra look like to us?
I think Michael,
I think, yeah, I think can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'd have to model it through the viability for additional units. I don't think it's quite as simple as just applying 15% to everything and doing it. So I think without running it through the model, I couldn't really comment on what it would seem. But obviously we can run a further viabilities if the request comes through to explore it further.
we'll see this report going to changing the basis. This moment in time, this is our.
I can understand how we feel though. I was so upset that that is an off the cuff. Oh, we can just build some more there and move the Grays people into there. You know, it was so off the cuff and just an announcement that, how much money have we spent to get to this?
So Chair, if I may, I mean, what you've spent to get to this is still valid work because, as Keith quite rightly says, this is the base of your scheme, and there's certainly always the prospect that those numbers can change. Now, as like Keith, I'm not going to speculate as to what those numbers end up with. But even before the announcements with which you're concerned, I would be happy to predict that it wouldn't ultimately finish at being 80. And the report, to be fair, does say approximately 80.
Don't say 100.
I hear what you're saying. Certainly the report is still, as Evelyn rightly says, still gets into the cabinet. Numbers will change, planning applications do change in the design. This is quite an early report, as Keith says. Might quite properly is not going to be drawn. I'm happy to speculate that actually an increase in numbers will not significantly alter the finance. I think actually it'll still be viable. That is me putting my head on the block and having a bit of a punt. That's not a modelled model system. I think the bigger issue is like the discussion around planning. Yeah, I mean the thing will iterate, the thing will change.
What's the smallest square footage? Smallest one? So they will all meet the nationally prescribed standards, so that is the smallest flat in a one bedroom, if I'm correctly, I think is just over 50 square metres. Can't give you maths to get on the list. It would be, I think the conversion factor is about 10.7, I think something to that order, but I think in terms of square metres for the complaint. I'm just running around and can't make it that much smaller than that. So where's the space top room?
Going up. Going up.
So all of the scheme designs that we would put forward at any council project be at least the minimum space standards by policy, etc.
So when you change your numbers, it will just come back here as a whole new report then? Yes?
Got a new report.
At this moment in time, the recommendations are on sort of page 1, so it's comment on the development to be funded through HRA, directed by the council, property owner lines by the council, and that consultants are to be appointed. So that's what this we are asking for.
Okay, well, I'll just move on that it's just going to be the 82, because that's what's going to cabinet next week. Okay, approximately 82. All right.
But that's what we've got to say, haven't we? Because all those 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, there's not really anything in there that's going to.
We're just going to have a look. I want to have just a little look at the. So looking at the build costs to break even, we've got a small surplus that doesn't allow for anything to go wrong. Okay, with the amount of money, to a degree, £1,095 per flat per year if we don't overspend. Okay, and if we don't have to put in any more money. So that kind of goes to where Mike was in, is there any room in this? There's not a lot of wiggle room for this to go any costs to be overspent, you know, so so it's quite worrying that the figures, you know, on if I look at the cost, we've got 21.6 is the build contract costs. Does that include the demolition costs?
Yes, it includes that, and it includes
All the legal
contingency.
fees, all the national railway
That's the-
stuff.
Yeah, so we have the sort of 1.7 being sort of project development costs for the legal fees and that sort of type of thing. With the build contract forecasting there, so that includes the construction element. It also included demolition, but also included some cost provision. So there'll be contingency within that, so that there is some scope for changes that in terms of cost price. There's an inflation element added in there as well.
What have you allowed for inflation? Because it's likely to hit 7%, and I spoke to the builders in Tilbury on Monday, and he said building costs have gone up by a third already.
So there's the cost plan had the BCIS, the British, the details, but it's the organisation that produces the cost forecasts.
Yeah,
Over
REBA,
time.
yeah, I know,
So-
Royal Institute of Building. Yeah.
Instance, indeed,
British architects.
thank
Yeah.
you. So
That's one.
So it's got, it's based in that evidence. We also know, just from market research, that BCIS is forecasting reduction in build cost inflation down to about 3.6% next year. So there is a professional judgment made to our cost consultants to apply a reasonable element of inflation, given all of the BCIS factors that are out there.
But if everything goes all right, we're going to make 92,000 £92,000 an annum, as long as we don't have any slippage and nothing goes wrong.
Well, there's, as I say, there is provision in there. There's a contingency element to it. To
I can see that black hole coming down and the A13 coming back to bite us.
consultant certificate, that you absolutely. But all I can say from the professional position, there are cost inflation elements in there. There's contingency built within that budget, and as we say, you know, we will be monitoring costs as the scheme design changes over time.
Okay, so if I go to 3.2, I'm sticking on the financial viability because I am worried that we are walking into something here. I'm thinking that we did look at this for TRL, didn't work, did talk to some private investors, they don't want to touch it, right? So the last option is we've got an empty building, we're going to have to build it ourselves and we're going to have to do it through the HRA. That's where I feel, you know, and then when I look at the financial viability, we've got loads of words in there, like challenging, tightly constrained, this may happen, demolition is complex, this assumes, cost estimate could evolve over time until final design is fixed, cost inflation. There's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes in this with not a lot of wiggle room that I think if I'm not a betting person, I wouldn't put my money on this coming in and being budgeted.
So I don't need to ask for a response, but all I can say is we've been very clear this is an early report.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to this coming back. So the next thing will be that it will go to planning with the figures, and then it will come back. Or is it going to come back?
Come back here first.
We've only got. It's going to planning in June. It's got to come back at the very next housing scrutiny, yeah? Yeah. Before it goes to planning. Because I'm just a little bit.
Can't go to planning in the degree it is at the moment.
No,
Absolutely.
it can't. No, certainly not. You know, and even in the financial, it's just saying there's a very small financial surplus in this. I am very worried, right? And that's what can't say it enough. You know, I am quite concerned about the amount of money that this could just go. We live in, you know, a world where everything. I've just had to have some new fences and things, you know, like, and and it's a worldwide shortage. We're going to be up against everything else. Everything's not rosy out there for building costs, you know, so there is a worldwide shortage which will shoot the building costs up, and we need to be honest about how much money we're building into the HRA, because this isn't just us borrowing the council's money and ending up with 1.5 billion. And do you know what I mean? This is now the HRA money, and I am concerned that, you know, this is not probably quite right. If we could pick this up and move this development somewhere else, we won't be building it on that bridge in Appington. And not the railway I'm worried about, it's the demolition and how deep we've got to go, you know, to get the foundations right.
So we don't find a sack and bury them.
Oh,
Indeed.
I think they've got to have, sorry, then they've got to have done that before, when they built it before, that they've got to have looked into that, because it was just a car park with shops around it. There was nothing else here. So, and I remember it, you know, so.
But as we just said, it was a less regulated, less restricted
No,
environment.
not that long.
No.
Yeah, so we're going to ask, I've gone there.
So I've always been around, and it's at the risk of being that, you know, we would always bring, before we go and seek a priority for a contractor to go out for tender, because no one really knows the cost until the contractor submits a price. We would always come back with a revised report before we get to that stage.
I can just think of, in the pipeline, other sites that I've spent £20 million on and not redeveloping the CO1. Yes, I do want housing. Yes, we are desperate for housing. Joy's desperate for housing. All of us are on our ward. But you know, this isn't even going to touch the waiting list. This is going to be decanted in places. We've got thousands sitting on there, and we've got sites in the pipeline that we could be using £20 odd million on, and we could be building beautiful stuff elsewhere. But we are loaded with that civic offices with no choice but of our own.
What I was going to say is, officers have done a lot of work on this, and I'm sure they've gone into most of what's going to happen. Yes, you say it's not going to alter much of the list, but it's something. You know, we need 1-bedroom flats. We need those sort of things. But the work that's been done, and I perhaps shouldn't say this, but I'm wondering why this has come here.
Me too.
Because surely it could have come in June with the revised and the right way of doing it. Because are we just wasting our time going through this when it might not be what it is? And I don't want wasted time of officers that have spent a great deal of time on this.
This is where I started the
Yeah, and I think that I don't want to be negative all the time, because we need housing.
We're desperate.
And with what's happening to Grays, with everything that's happening to Grays will be good, the money that's coming into Grays, and that's got to be looked at as good, because you've got shops handy, you've got railway, you've got buses to take you everywhere. So it's you know, you're right adjacent to everything. And you've got the river down there, which most people forget. It is a river down there. You know? Yeah, most people forget it. But I think what I don't want to be is too negative. But I do wonder if it's going to come back in June, why come now?
The answer really is that we were asked by members to bring an early report, so we have.
Perhaps we're at fault in a way. We asked it too quick.
Yeah, I would have been happy with this coming tonight had the new figures not been chucked out and through the finances up in the air, because more flats means more right to buy, receipts needed to be borrowed, and more rent and, you know, loans on the HRA. That was my trigger point for, you know, not really buying into this, because I think it made it a project that's not. I just think.
No, and if it's coming back in while we're discussing
absolutely
this, really.
Absolutely. So, and listen, Mike, have you got anything?
All I'd like to say is that to pick up on that point of yours, I did start by saying.
It is, yeah, no, it's good.
This is not, certainly not getting you right. Two things. One is it's acknowledging, exactly as Chair has said, that this is not where you would choose to build a development. Going by what's in here, it's not the ideal spot, which means it does carry risk, which means it's the HRA's money at risk. That's not, I don't think anything that you've said in here contradicts that. So we need to be aware of it. I also think, I'm assuming that you were totally unaware of the figures that the legal counsel was going to chuck around on Monday night. And I do feel it doesn't help your case. Doesn't help you guys when people decide, well, why not, let's make it 100. I think though you will need that to become clearer, so that you are in a better position to do your thinking and to redo your calculations, so that you're not sitting there next time you bring it thinking, is the bloke going to talk to somebody else and make it 120?
I know, you got blindsided and it's not your fault.
That's
and
not down
not
to
what
you.
we-
So please be, let's be clear. This is not getting at you. It's saying this is a risky endeavour. The last thing you need, political capital.
I don't think we can ask officers to
We
say
can't,
anything about
officers
that.
can't be-
No, it's putting them in a bad position to think they might.
That's why I'm
know.
stating it
Yeah.
rather than asking you.
Yeah.
I don't think they need to say anything.
No.
Absolutely, and then I'm going to move on, Julian.
So I think what I would leave you with, and thank you for your consideration of the matters. I think what I would leave you with is probably 3 comments. The first is that this is our best advice to you as the Cabinet as we stand here today. We have, others have done a great deal more work than me, but we have collectively worked on this, and this is our best advice at this stage. It will undoubtedly change, as Keith has said, and I've reiterated, and that is entirely normal, and it should do. I think the second point just to make is just to be careful about this concept of risk. Risk in a market sale point is you're going to spend money and you're going to lose it. The risk of a building that doesn't make surplus on the HRA doesn't mean that you're going to lose the money. I mean, you may have to adjust maintenance or staffing or things that you do down the line.
Right to buy, does that happen after 15 years on these? Will that still apply? 15 years, somebody living in there can buy them?
Subject to the cost floor rule, because they can't be purchased for less than construction costs.
And it is important to remember you're talking about a slightly different category of risk. And just to make a comparison, the risk of suppose costs go, and this does go slightly out of surplus, will still be costing your HRA considerably less than defective properties that you may be dealing with elsewhere. So you do need to keep that risk issue in context. This is not a black hole where you will lose your money.
Isn't this already at about £300,000 per unit if we don't go over budget?
It's in the top,
300,000.
on the
It's a
figures
lot
of
of
the
money,
note, it's
isn't
the
it, for
top
a
end.
1 bed flat? To build a 1 bed flat is going to be 300,000.
It's not a cheap site. We're not telling you.
No.
And this is exactly the point what was mentioned there. You need to adjust to things like maintenance. This is where you end up with a black trust building. These are the things you cannot compromise on. So I'm sorry, adjustment worries me.
It may be quite a long while down the road.
Absolutely. I think this is one that, well, we'll see it back in June anyway. And thank you for the work that officers have done on this. And I'm going to move on to recommendations. Everybody agree the recommendations on page 14, 1.1, 2 and 3.
I don't think there's much there to disagree.
No, there isn't. There's nothing there. There's nothing
What you
there.
really,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
you know.
the recommendations didn't really go.
No, there wouldn't be anything. I
Well,
would.
we have commented, so
We certainly have commented.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to move on to animals in council properties, which you can find on pages 25 to 36. So it's a nice fluffy. I should wait for officers to leave. Sorry.
We don't have to go. We're not in that bad.
We're just going to pause for a couple of minutes. Wait for you to come back, right?
Thanks, Keith.
thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thank you. Take care. Right. Be careful.
Okay, can you hear me clearly?
No, we're not ready.
No,
Ready.
have another cup of tea, Peter.
Can I just wait a minute? We've got one missing. We've got one missing for 2 minutes.
Comfort break.
And then you can give us your nice fluffy report. Absolutely, I think that was the longest.
Yeah, we won't have.
Don't worry, the others won't. I think that one was worth the debate because it's so important. By the context of our still recording.
Yeah, I think we should just split that off for a minute. Yeah, should we do it? Yeah, what was it? I would, because it's careful.
Council Fletcher's coming back now, so I'll just keep it.
And of course, everybody knows.
Yeah, we know where.
Right, okay, so moving on to, where am I? Oh yeah, item 6, animals in council properties, which you can find on page 25 to 36 of your agenda. We've got 30 minutes, but I'm going to try and do a bit of catch up here. So,
Yes.
Can I ask Chief Deputy to present your report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report which has been carried over from the previous meeting, so hopefully members are well acquainted with it. So animals, pets in council housing. So the report itself highlights the management of animals in council properties is through the enforcement of our tenancy agreement, in which there are two principal terms and conditions. So they're referred into the report at 4.42, the permission clause, and 4.3, which is the clause dealing with antisocial behaviour, nuisance and annoyance. So the report also highlights that although there's no separate policy document for managing pets, pets, Freudian slip there, sorry, there's a section providing guidance in the tenancy policy. So just turning to the various clauses that I've just referenced, the permission clause, which I say is 4.42. This says that ultimately a tenant needs to get written permission from us to have a pet. The fact that a tenant has not sought permission for a pet would amount to a breach of the terms and conditions of the council tenancy policy, and we could seek an injunction to have the pet removed. That's the simplest thing, really. However, if the pet's not causing a nuisance or an annoyance to neighbours, this could be considered unreasonable by the courts who were to take such an action. So in those cases where there are reports of an animal creating a nuisance or annoyance, there's a need for us to evidence and corroborate such complaints. And that's quite important. You know, very often we get complaints from our tenants about animals, where there may be, for example, low-level barking, and it's very difficult for us sometimes to be able to evidence that. So getting evidence together and corroborating complaints is extremely important. The other thing really that we would need to note here is that even if there is a breach, again, the courts would expect us, you know, to try to resolve matters by exhausting all non-legal remedies ahead of taking any kind of formal action, unless, of course, there's been a serious breach. So again, looking at breaches, you have different types of breaches of tenancy. You know, one where, for example, we have a dog which is being let off its leash on a regular basis and barking and effectively, you know, potentially attacking people. That would be a very different matter in front of the courts than, as I say, a low-level barking, which is happening on an infrequent basis and very, very difficult to corroborate. So that's really the kind of the two key aspects really around the tenancy terms and conditions, as I say, permission, and also the fact that we do have one around antisocial behaviour, nuisance and annoyance. That aside, recent studies, and I'm sure you've picked this up as well during the COVID pandemic, they've shown that there are many benefits to owning and caring for a pet, from decreasing blood pressure to combating loneliness and self-isolation. And these positive impacts have really been increasingly noticed by the government. And recently, as well, January 2021, they've updated their model tenancy agreement for the private sector. And it's now a condition that landlords will no longer be able to issue blanket bans on pets. So instead, consent for pets will be the default position. So by analogy, we would expect that, I imagine, would have to be followed by local authorities and the housing associations in terms of their tenancy agreements when they revise them. So that's a marked change from where we are at the moment. So that whole aspect around permission ultimately is something that we need to be looking at going forward if we're to take into consideration, let's say, the changes that the government have made in terms of the private sector tenancy agreements. So bearing all that in mind, in view of these changes, it's recommended that the council reviews its standard tenancy terms and conditions relating to pets and produces also a standalone policy to reflect these changes, and that's what the report recommends. So that ultimately is the nature of the report. So if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Go first. So if this is already in place, yeah, this is already there. How many people have actually signed an agreement with you to own a dog, a cat, a lizard, a bird? You know, I've never. I bet. Go on. I bet you could count on one hand, Pete, how many people, you know, you've got to actually sign this that's been in their homes for 10 years.
I can't honestly say that. I mean, I could try and establish that information from you, but it's certainly something that we do ask for, and I certainly know it has been happening. But I presume the big thing around it is, you know, once I've said we could take action for somebody not getting permission. Ultimately, the courts would take, I think, a fairly dim view to it, unless the actual pet is causing, as I say, a nuisance or annoyance. It's unlikely we would get such a remedy from the courts anyway. So, in some ways, whilst I say it's part of our tenancy agreement, going forward, the recommendation is that that should no longer be the case, that they have to get written permission. But as I say, it's really around them causing a nuisance or annoyance, which is, I think, the main issue here. I mean, if you had if you were living in a property with a neighbour next door with a dog, and the dog wasn't causing any bother, you know, what the question really would be to the courts, well, why would we want to get rid of the dog, particularly if somebody's got, you know, a disability, or, as I say, it's addressing one of those key issues that we talked about before, you know, the health and well-being aspects about having an animal. But to answer your question very briefly, I mean, I don't actually know how many written agreements we've got, but if you would like me to look into that, I'll certainly do that.
I just think that there won't be many. My other question, yeah, I'd like to know how many. Yeah, we would like to know how many you've got. You know, we've got over 10,000 houses. Yeah. You know, I'd like to probably would like to know. My bigger problem that I've got is people that are living in our council homes and have become dog breeders. And they are everywhere. They absolutely are exploiting these animals. And so what is being done, I'm more worried about them than somebody getting themselves a little furry dog or cat or whatever. I'm more worried about people breeding dogs for breeding's sake and selling them on the open market for up to £5,000 a pup. You know, that is wrong. You know, they're not registered. How many registered breeders have we got in council properties?
I'd be surprised if we have any, to be honest with you. And it's one of those aspects around running a business which we would, I think, we would have issue with. I mean, bearing in mind, most council properties are in localities where you're sharing with other people. I just don't think, if we had breeders, that wouldn't be reported through to us, or we haven't picked it up. But I would be surprised. You might tell me otherwise.
We have got breeders all over them.
We can probably tell you where they are.
So yeah, I'd be more interested to know that. And I did have one more question, and that was how are you going to enforce any of this? You're not, are you, really? Unless it's really an animal that's causing a significant problem, you're not going to enforce any of this, are you?
What I will say, I mean, absolutely, we will enforce it. We have the tenancy is there, and I certainly expect my officers, when they have an issue, to address those issues. You know, and where we need to enforce, we will enforce. I mean, we have a series of non-legal remedies available to us, which, we're expected to follow that as well. The courts expect you to follow a path of escalation, really, in terms of addressing issues. But if we have a serious issue, absolutely. If there's an issue which is continuous, we'll use, as say, the non-legal remedies, and we will enforce it as well. We don't have a problem with that at all, like any breaches of the tenancy agreement. I would say as well, whilst I've only been with Thurrock for 15 months, I've worked elsewhere in housing for over 20 years, and I've taken significant action around animals in the past. So it's not going to be any different working for Thurrock, I can assure you.
Thank you. Joy's got some questions for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, as I was the one that asked this to come to, we're not asking that people get rid of dogs who are helping them and they've got one pet. I asked this to be brought forward because we've got people with cats who don't have them done. Then we end up with 10 or 15 kittens around the place where they're not even chipped. And we've got some places, flats, where we've got 3 dogs in a flat. And I think as a council, we've got to get a bit tougher, Peter. Mm-hmm. And you probably know, you've worked before. It's not about, I don't even think it's about a dog barking, because something can be done about that most of the time. I think most people look after their pets. Most people are good. They do as they're told. But as Lynn said, we've got people out there breeding cats and dogs. Not so long ago, I had a case where a man had 15 boa constrictors in a flat, in a house, and we allowed him to have those. And my argument was, why didn't we tell him to get? Well, I did tell him to get rid of them, but he didn't have anything else if he didn't get rid of them. But why do we allow that to go? That's boa constrictor is something, if it gets out and he had children, that could kill a child. Yeah, and I think that's the danger. We've got to be a little bit more savvy in our approach to people who perhaps we can only do it in people that take on a tenancy. When we start, that's how you've got to be. 1 pet per whatever. There shouldn't be 3 dogs in 1 flat. It's not fair to the animals to be that. So I just wanted this to come here because we need to be a bit more, we need to clamp down a little bit more on what sort of pets are in places. I think we had a monkey once, didn't we? A little while ago.
We did, yeah, Mum said, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's those, like the boa constrictors I had, I couldn't believe what he had, and I think if we don't know what they've got, so perhaps we do need a little bit of tightening up of what is happening in council property.
Absolutely.
And that's all I will say, Peter. Thank you.
Okay. Peter, did you want to come back on?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is that, if an animal is a potential danger, or if it's creating a nuisance, we will take action. We are due to review our tenancy terms and conditions. I think the last time we reviewed them was in 2014. So we're, not far off 10 years since we last reviewed. So I'm looking probably 23, 24. So next year, as part of a service plan to actually do that. It's a big undertaking, but we need to do it anyway. So as part of that, this will be the kind of thing that, the kind of issues that you've raised, we will be looking at. But I'll ensure as well, in terms of the recommendation that's going forward about having a pet policy, that we set out a bit more around guidelines around the aspects about how we expect animals to be kept, etc. But we work very, very closely both with the police and with the RSPCA and other agencies, to ensure the welfare of the animal as well as as well as individual tenants is looked after. So where action is required, we'll take it.
Why do we have to wait so long, through you, Chair? Why do we have to wait so long, Peter, to do, update? We haven't done it. It'll be, if you say it's 24, that'll be 10 years before we've done an update on our tenancy agreement. Why do we have to wait so long?
Really, it's dependent on the changes that take place in law and regulation, but also if there are major societal changes. But the tenancy agreement, the general terms and conditions that we have, they generally hold sway for long periods of time. Over certainly 7 or 8, 9, 10 years. There's certain things that change that we need to look at, and that's the reason why we don't do them every so often. And I say it is a major exercise as well, changing the tenancy terms and conditions. It's a, you know, it's a good lead-in project. We have to consult with all our residents as well. So when we do it, it will be, you know, it's a big piece of work that needs to be undertaken.
Has anybody else got anything?
I'd like to say something. It's my amusement, really. It's got conditions may be withdrawn any time if we consider that an animal, bird, or reptile. I thought bird. I'm thinking of a budgie or a canary, but but they're not really to other people, are they? Really, a chirping. I'm just thinking, doesn't that have a big parrot? Perhaps is that bird we're talking about? Not a bald eagle or something, is it? You know,
Buzzer dogs, people keep buzzer dogs. My dad used to
yeah,
have buzzer dogs.
I just wanted birds, and I've just thought
Pigeons? Pigeons?
yeah, oh, that's outdoors. Yeah.
Mind you, hawks or pigeons are likely to be better.
That's my dad's babies. Right, okay, nobody, oh, yeah, Councillor Nash.
I just want to find out, 1.2, if we were to have a pet policy, when is that likely to come?
So if you agree with the recommendation, it'll be one of the policies we're just doing a review of policies and procedures. So it probably wouldn't be one of the immediate ones, but I certainly would promise it would be delivered during the next year.
Yes, but we have, we'll have the policy.
Only one of the big ones. And inform residents.
So every resident will get an amendment to their policy, to their tenancy.
That's the bigger project on the terms and conditions, but the pet policy or any policy of nature wouldn't necessarily be a decision that we need to consult and sort of
Suggests there will be issues about
If we brought this, we need to see the outcome.
Well, if we could have it as a circulate at least.
just to read and.
so, yeah.
If we have a briefing note, yeah,
absolutely.
a briefing note, right, so that we don't have to. Yeah.
I'll say, Chair, that is something, if it's just on one piece of paper, Peter, that is something that perhaps we go to full council while we're all in there, 49 of us, and everybody knows.
Yeah.
It's not just us that need to know, it's all council.
That's the only thing with scrutiny, isn't it? Is that we become very specialised in one area.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get out to the other 49.
So I think there's something that can go in front of everybody.
Yeah.
You know, just give it out to 49 of us.
And just put it on the table, right? So I don't have to.
Save you posting it, Peter. Price of stamps.
Right, guys, I'm going to move on unless anybody's got anything really burning with that. No, because I don't want to be in here past. No, I don't want us to be moving on. So, can we agree recommendation 1.1 and 1.2 on page 25?
I think there could have been something there a bit stronger, but that's just my opinion. It's no.
Could I ask what that might be, Councillor Redsell?
Just something a bit stronger in there. I just didn't think that was enough in there. A bit wishy-washy for me.
I thought we was moving away from it, but again, it should come up in the Constitution Working Group. It's too much to know, and
I just don't think there's anything there really that's not in.
But I think, as Evelyn said, it's just a change of policy rather than a decision.
As long as it goes to everybody and everybody sees it, so they can at least in their ward they
We'll
can.
get a briefing note and we'll make sure it goes out.
Yeah, thanks Peter for all your hard work anyway.
And it can be distributed to every councillor.
Yeah.
Yes, Joy?
Yes, fine.
Okay, I'm moving on. Okay. So we're now moving on to item 7, which is the update on the incident at Lionel Oxley House, and you can find this on page 37 to 40 of the agenda. Oh, can I say the name that's here? Is this
Excuse me, only because it crosses so many areas that I thought
okay.
I'll present that. I will be brief. I do have two specialists, so Alistair. Technical question. And Peter is sort of staying with us, any sort of resident related questions and just in the back session that we. Yes, so this is a follow-on report as we were asked to bring the time, and we had given by ourselves 4 key elements addressed by one. So we wanted to know what was the cause of the fire in the first place and what was the fire networks were. First, we wanted to let you know about the sort of reflections and structure of that type. We've set up a sort of reflective learning session with the council about various things that went on during the day and in the and further on, and residents. So I'm going to skip the technical, sort of written here, but in a nutshell, it's a use and we've got confirmation that obviously the site as well as similar sites have been checked for us, and we don't that. In terms of the lessons learned from the officer group, so there were very key themes around the patient and how they implement troubles, and we've had parts of the emergency planning as to who does what, procedure rather, who does what in which circumstance, so it's not any such major incident. There will be are taking the on actual communication so that those who are attending to the incident on the ground can actually focus on the incident as opposed to everyone informed. So our communication firmly that it's to take that. Obviously, it's got to be follow that when everything going. We have sort of spread the awareness about the emergency planning rota and levels of command just to what so the council is very clear the bronze, silver and gold command, and this was shared within housing roles that we all play. We've agreed to keep all of the out of hours rotas in place as opposed to in services and the services now. There is a piece of now to access contact. We've confirmed that in sort of emergency situations, we particularly what we house and to cover the cost of the meals. A number of company credit cards have now been sort of issued to the process line, so there's readily sort of access to that in case of emergency. We are looking and sort of mapping out where the welfare facilities are for should there be emergency, and we've sort of educated one another about the handling airline and how does the sort of travel. We took on board the sort of phone cards and notes of that, and that's now in progress. Feedback from residents, quite a number of sort of ways we did that. So there was a door knock, there was a focus session, and we have extended our apology to residents. Absolutely plan. We've got also people products to us and have to phone call and conversations as well with residents. So you can sort of update a little bit more as to what the issues where we tried to put every single thing as a theme into the report so it's transparent. Due to right to residents, I believe this week, Peter, isn't it? And we just compiling sort of the responses.
That's right.
What, what's transpired though, that there was definitely a lot more kind of ongoing education that needs to happen. I mean, we've had feedback from residents. I saw a bit of a smoke. I was interested where it was coming from, so I opened the door to that. So it's those sort of things. So I think those officers, our building safety managers, have now committed to doing regular sessions with just carry on the same message, how to behave in case of emergency was fire, but how to sort of an emergency. And we've sort of took on board some of the other very practical points about being more visible whilst we on site. I mean, this particular incident, there were between different times of day, but there was anything between 6 to 10 council officers. Yet we had a resident or two that said no council officers were present. So there was something, high vises, very
Flashing lights on the
flashing,
top,
anything, because obviously it's quite difficult then to say no. Of course we weren't on site when we weren't, and it's that sort of conversation. So I think good lessons learned session, good feedback session with residents as well. That's went according to plan. And so that is all from me. Technical questions to Alistair or anything else on this?
I only want to say, reading it, I think you moved quite quickly, and I think it probably could have been worse if we hadn't have moved that quickly. I think we learnt it on the last Thursday when we had the wind. Us as councillors were given emergency numbers, which I found brilliant, because we might be a 24/7 society, but the council isn't 24/7. There is nowhere to get anyone if you want them quick, and I was grateful to that, because we had trees down in streets and roads, and I think that helped really.
For me, this was a real lesson learned document, and that's why I wanted to see it. So we had a lot to say last time, and if the council's learned, as a PR exercise, a health and safety exercise, everything, then then that is a good reason why this report.
Trouble is, we can be lessons learned, but you can't tell people what they're going to do.
The only thing that I had picked up out of this is, why are residents being told that they take the locks off the washroom? Now, I'd be worried if that was my clothes hanging in there. So now they're saying, we're not going to use the washrooms anymore. We're going to take our clothes indoors and keep them on a clothes sword. Damp and mould. So Joy wants to see washrooms. They're saying no longer. Why can't they just have a key code? And I don't believe that the fire brigade wouldn't get in a washroom, because they can come through anything if they want to get through. just because it's got a little yowl lock on the bottom of it, that is not a reason to take the washroom keys off. I am on the resident side that actually, when you've got your clothes hanging in there and there's 4 flats on one floor, I don't think that, people can come into those flats. Sometimes you don't take your washing in of a night time, or you might. I used to play mine out of a night time. Once the kids have gone to bed, it's go to the washroom and hang it out. Anyone can come through them floors and they can clear every single washroom out. And what's the council going to say? So I think you're opening yourself up for, some really angry residents when their school uniforms, their kids go missing. And
I also think, Lynn, that council have got get a bit more savvy with comms as well, because I've had to ring my residents today for something that happened in Keir Hardy. It was nothing to do with them. They're in Bevan, and it's what's being reported out there on social media, and whatever news is reporting something, it's worrying people. So I think we've got to get a bit more savvy in the council to what we put out to people in comms.
We haven't got enough comms.
We haven't. No, we've got to be better.
Chair, if I may, because comms is what I do. I think what this says, although the lessons learned, I think it's great, what this says to you is comms are. It's not long as actually been an incident, but it's communication. Comms is how you make sure that you're not messing up. So it is things like, I mean, I'm actually gobsmacked being a portfolio holder councillors weren't involved. That is a lesson. That a half decent communications team. This is comms needs to be in there, both internally and externally, just making sure that people who need to make decisions are aware that we need to. So, for instance, getting the emergency so that ward councillors can actually do their job. So, you know, please, in viewing this, please let's not just do comms in terms of, oh, what do we say to our legacy? No. How do we use comms better to make sure that the thing is actually managed more efficiently from the start? Who needs to be aware, involved? How do we make sure they're aware and involved quicker? That's comms. PR's just.
I think I wouldn't have heard, if I wasn't speaking to Evelina at that particular time, I wouldn't have known about Keir Hardy. And to me, we let down a lot of councillors because we just don't let them know. And they're the ones
Take it in the ear on.
Yeah, and we're going to get the first phone call, whether it's 11 o'clock at night or whatever. What's happening, council? Sorry, I can't tell you, didn't know. That doesn't look very good on my part. And I think that's where we've got to be better. Yeah.
Not just this, it's across the council wide.
Definitely.
It should be there.
I mean,
Councillors first.
Yeah, I mean, you know, something like Everbridge, which is a very simple text-based tool. That's what it is. Right. Message out, job done. Terminate. Across the council. And something is going.
It does worry someone on the 11th floor with children who think that's happened over there. Is it something that I've got to be worried about? No, I've allayed their fears and fine, because you've told them the truth. And I think that's the trouble. We're not telling people the truth of what's happened, and they learn it from someone else.
And in a vacuum, all the stuff starts to.
Definitely.
Okay, I'm going to bring you all back in line again
Right.
now. You're having a conversation. Yeah, you got a question?
Oh, well, it's not really a question, it's just acknowledge the report.
Song sheet.
I think it's very reflective. I like it. So I always say the lessons learned. Lessons are smart targets, which you must say for yourself. Very specific, very measurable. But for me, I think, I'm not very sure whether it's there, something like that. Regular updates of the service through maintenance record.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned in the last update, the whole regulation specific around high-rise stuff is changing. So Evelina mentioned building safety management. So high-rise building taking place. So all that documentation is going to be centralised document, which is fine. There's a specifically for high-rise, we just carry out that. But absolutely, in terms of the maintenance, it's always fundamental to us to comply. So we're recording that. And our communication with UK nurses is set up and so we can try.
They're going to let you claim on them insurance.
We're working.
Told you it was going to be a long process. I think that actually, from lessons learned, I don't think we need to see this again, do we? I think that we're happy that, other than to know that I do think you make a mistake taking the locks off the washers. More of the communications and always let councillors know.
Yeah, that's what I think should be in that recommendation. I think that's the housing overview and scrutiny are invited to comment. We comment. We've made the comment that we should be notified, so we've got the right things to tell our
Definitely
residents.
all councillors should know about anything that goes on.
Yeah, so perhaps we should change that slightly then with through you.
Okay.
And Lucy. Sorry.
What you want it in the comment that
I would.
Councillors.
If we've been told to comment,
Okay.
and we're not commenting, then it's no point, is it?
Well, I think that the comments are all in the minutes, but
I'd like to
so
see
you wanted
something.
1.2,
Yeah,
yeah. But want to add more councillors to,
Well, councillors,
Portfolio
portfolio
holders.
holders,
yeah,
and officers who have a
a direct responsibility, yeah.
Should be as a matter of course
Yeah.
involved about anything. To be honest, any.
It's not going to be
An
the last time, is
emergency if there
it?
was, yeah?
This is not going to be the last time then.
No. Got that.
Yeah, so ward councillors, portfolio holders and directly responsible officers should be made aware of
Any incident.
any
Serious
incidents,
incident.
any serious incidents.
Mhm.
So we could
Totally
stick it
take
to
it
the,
on.
to the serious and emergency
Oh,
one, because if
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
just mentioned police, we wouldn't be
No.
able to
Yeah.
track every single police intervention,
No.
but.
No.
No. Serious,
Oh,
incidents.
Sorry, they never come anyway.
Serious incidents, yeah, that affect their wards, yeah. Okay, can we move on then?
Yeah.
We're agreeing that and we've added a new recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving on to the last item. So how long have you got? Oh, you've got 50 minutes, Mike.
Don't need that long.
Item 8 is the right to buy, receipt and fee, poll, which you can find on page 45 to 52 of your agenda. And can I ask Mark Jones to present your report?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So this was the report in response to the conversation we had at the end of the last ONS, which was really about how right to buy receipts work, how much we had, and what the kind of the relationship with buy was all about. So I've drafted this really in quite a bit of sort of detail and background, so I won't read it all out, but I think it's just essentially to sort of say what the retained right to buy receipts are, because I just want to appreciate that everybody might not be fully aware of the sort of the process and what it was. But basically, in a nutshell, it's the amount of money that the council gets to retain after people have purchased their council property through the right to buy scheme. So the council gets a retained element of it. The rules changed back in 2012, which meant the council basically kept the biggest share of that, as long as it reinvested it back into either the purchase or the development of new units, which is called the one-to-one basis, essentially what that meant. The rules back then basically meant that after we got the receipts, we had to spend them within a period of 3 years. And it was also kind of done on a quarterly basis. So receipts, say, of a June for a particular year expired within 3 years within the June. So it became quite difficult, even with the best of intentions to spend them, to actually get a development through and be able to do them. So when we were looking at this in the sort of the previous financial year, we were getting to a period where the expiry date of the receipts was starting to sort of catch up on us. And essentially, if you don't spend these, they get returned back to central government. And on top of that, they charged you a compound interest on the amount as well. So not only did you return the money, you also have to pay an amount to return the money effectively. So the five thing, I'm sort of jumping about a little bit here, but the five thing essentially came in where we needed to get rid of, well, basically spend the receipts to utilise them within about a sort of 6 to 9 months period. So it was never going to be able to be spent on the development. So what we were able to do was purchase open market properties, get them through, and essentially it's new homes. It was new additional housing stock for the benefit of the HRA. So that's essentially what we did. So with that money, we used it, purchased open market and brought them into the stock. Just going back to some of the changes. So what happened subsequently was what the government then did. They extended the period to 5 years. So after you got the receipt, you had 5 years to spend them. So the ones which sort of came in now, there's a 5-year period. So that makes it obviously a much better lead-in time, and it's much better to be able to plan what to do with them. So if we sort of go to the table 1, which is the finances, this kind of sort of tells the story as to where we were. So when we opened 2021-22, we had just over £21 million of retained receipts. What we've done up till the time of writing this report, which was period 10, we'd spent 9.2 million of them. So this was all contribution to the acquisition of new properties into the HRA. We've got a further estimated plan that by the end of this year we'll spend a further 4.8 million. So that's just over £14 million that we've used of right to buy receipts towards the purchase and acquisition of additional units. That will leave us around about 7 million at the end of this year, and we'll also have the receipts coming in for the financial year of 3.6. So we'll be going into next year with an opening balance of 10 million. Then what we've done is we've then looked at the estimated level of receipts which we predict to receive will probably remain fairly static at around about 3.6 million. And what we're effectively doing under the development schemes is this is where that money's sort of going into. So you can see 4 schemes on there. I think they're quite widely known schemes. And this is the contribution that the right to buy receipts are making towards the financial cost of those projects. So the first sort of stage of the right to buy receipts, I would say, went towards the acquisition of open market properties. The second is very much about investing into development and building our own units. So we can make that contribution, and that sort of fits in with a lot of the financial viabilities that you see, because we're able to contribute this level of capital receipt into those projects. That's how they help to meet the financial viability of what we see within them. So that's essentially the sort of the projection and a bit of the background. I've put in quite a bit of detail there about the fire leasing scheme. I won't read it out, but it kind of covers, I think, a lot of the sort of the issues in the background. There was obviously a wealth of information to this, and a lot of legal documentation, due diligence, and everything was done. So it's kind of a bit of a snapshot really as to how it worked, why we decided to do it, and what it's achieved. So all in all, by the end of this year, we're probably looking at round about, in terms of additional units through this, of about 130 to 140 additional homes into the HRA stock. So that's kind of the output really of all of that firework and the use of right to buy receipts and how it's been brought in. So those additional units they've been brought into the HRA stock. Some of them have benefited in terms of reducing some of the homelessness need and being able to move people onto permanent housing. Oh,
He's back. Say something. Yeah.
Can you still hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope I didn't go too far before I start. So did you hear the bit about the number of additional units into the stock? Yeah. Yes. So that was kind of the output of everything. And as I say, those units have been used to benefit housing across all aspects of housing. That's kind of essentially it in terms of the report. So I'm happy to take any specific questions.
What do you want to go first? Oh, you haven't got any? Okay. I'll go first for a change, Mike.
Okay.
I don't normally go first. So, I can understand that we needed to get rid of the first lot of right to buy money. Okay, so we've entered into this agreement. Why do we not just buy houses ourselves? If we can use 40% right to buy, why can't we just, get a loan? We're getting a loan to build a block of flats and we're building houses ourselves. Why do we not just go alone and buy houses ourselves?
So I think there's two aspects to that. I think one is purely a logistics and resources issue, because essentially buying the properties is like you would in your own. It's buying a property through a vendor, through an estate agent, and through a seller. So in terms of the sheer volume and magnitude to get this in, to buy 140 houses within the council, and bearing in mind it was a short-term project, we just really didn't have the resource or the capacity to be able to do it in-house. So what FI offer is that kind of that professional effectively acting as a purchasing agent on our behalf. So they've provided that for us. In terms of the costing, the initial amount we did through a lease arrangement with FI, and there were benefits to that in terms of some of the improvement works that were done at the onset, because some of the properties when we initially purchased them, Alistair and his team reviewed them, and some of them needed adaptations, for tenants, and certain things would be removed. So a lot of that work was contained within that original lease cost on the first round of properties. So that gave us that, and the relationship really, it just really was for speed and you know, in terms of getting that through. The second sort of phase of this, which was, you know, the direct acquisitions that I've kind of said, that was where we did that. In that instance, what we did, we effectively got fired to purchase the properties outright for us. We then matched fund 40%. The rest of it was potential borrowing cost. And as we see, the potential borrowing cost of the 60% compared to the rent is financially viable. So all of the rent money that people pay effectively just pay for that borrowing cost of the property or the lease cost in that instance.
And we don't own these, do we? Like, so where we've got 40%, we own, so we 40% and we lease 60%. No.
That's right. So
Yes,
in terms of the lease, yeah. So we have the lease cost. We've paid 40.
No. It's a lease. It's 100% lease. So it's not a shared ownership lease in that.
Okay.
It's 100% lease. It is for a period of 40 years that the lease.
We don't own any of it, not even the 40% that we paid up front.
Do you understand the question?
So the sort of the definition of a finance lease is essentially, if you've got the ownership and control of the asset, it's effectively yours. So in accounting terms, it's a little bit more complicated, but effectively, if you've got a finance lease, it is your asset. It's recognised on our balance sheet as our assets. The lease is really the repayment term. So if we'd have took a loan out, we'll repay that back over a period. The finance lease is purely the mechanism for the repayment of the.
They're not ours to sell on, are they? They're not ours. We
could sell them
no.
If we want.
No, we can't.
Right.
Sorry, I think I missed. Do you want to go, Evelina?
The question is, could we sell them as the sort of leasehold owner of the legal lease? So not about the financial lease, but as a kind of legal lease, could we sell them? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the title deed and the land registry is in the name of the council. So for all intents and purposes, they are our property. You know, the finance lease, I say, is purely just that mechanism of borrowing, and so that's all it is. It's just a different form of borrowing in effect.
So will we go on doing this big numbers? You know, like, you know, are we going to carry on acquiring houses through these, or yeah?
The problem is that the rules change next year. So as of the 1st of April 22, you're only allowed to purchase 20 open market properties and then a percentage of how many you develop. So it really sort of shuts the door on this. I think there's a couple of reasons there, because one, while it does increase our housing stock, it doesn't increase the number of new dwellings in the borough. So for the HOA, it's a benefit and we're buying them open market, but it's not increasing the number of dwellings which are in Thurrock. That's sort of why when you look at the table, sort of the second part, where we're then diverting that 25 million effectively into the development schemes, it's that mechanism there that essentially the answer is no, we're not going to purchase anymore. We're going to use that money to put it into the development of our own units.
So the numbers that we've got is the numbers that we're going to stick with, the 130 to 140.
That's it.
We're moving away from this fee financing model. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, sort of FI as an entity. I mean, they do the acquisitions and the purchases, but they're kind of wider than that. So that they do have opportunities for, you know, developments and things like that, which they sort of, you know, come through us with. But in terms of that open market acquisition, then no, we're really prohibited by that. But yeah, I mean, there's sort of schemes or possible development sites or things like that, which we can, you know, consider as an investment sort of partner or as an investment sort of opportunity. We would look at that, and they're sort of very active with things. I mean, they're looking at things at the moment around Homes England's grants and things like that, because obviously the right to buy receipt is a finite resource, and effectively we've kind of maximised everything we can do, and that's what we sort of planned against. But things like
it was good in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, it got us, you know, in terms of what we've done, we've utilised it, and we've got, I say, well over 100 new units into the stock.
One bed, Mike. You know, we're desperate for one beds. How many of those that we've bought are the one beds that we're desperately waiting to build,
It's not a lot of.
you know.
I'm not sure offhand, but what I can. But what I can say is we basically exhausted. We bought every one bed that was available, and then we had to start looking wider. So Alistair's probably been around more one bedroom sort of properties in the borough, every single property. So every single one bed that came up, we pretty much bought them. So in the end, in order to sort of get the numbers and the amount we could buy, we started expanding it into sort of, you know, slightly larger units. But I think every one bed that fit the criteria, Alistair, you certainly looked at, and we bought the ones which met the need. I can get them exact numbers, but I just haven't got them to hand. But I have got a complete breakdown.
What the 140 breakdown looks like, so that, you know,
Sure.
you can see, because in fact, they've gone into the HRA stock now, haven't they? So we will maintain them with the HRA stock as well, as how I understand it.
Exactly right.
Okay, thank you. I think it was, again, it was something that as a committee, I think that it was important that everybody understood how the fire partnership went, but that we've got it when it's just finished. So
It's actually a good
5
report.
years no more, but it was a good report. So thanks for that. It was a good report.
You didn't get me to question you, so it was so good.
Has anybody else got any questions? Anybody else got any questions? No. See how easy that was, right?
Get a good report. Don't
Can
need
we-
any questions.
Can we agree the recommendation 1.1? No, it's not there. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
1.1 on page 45.
Yeah,
Agreed.
agreed.
Item 10 is next year's work programme.
Mhm.
Has anybody got anything specific? I know Joy want a garages back.
Oh, no.
No. Why they're taking so long to do.
Well, we'll have it back next year, and maybe by then Chapel will have roofs on their ones.
I've got to do something. I just want them to aesthetically want them to look good.
Yeah.
You know.
So we've got garages. I shouldn't have started them off. Has anybody else got anything else that they want? I've got one.
Oh, yeah.
So
You know, she
before
thought of me like that.
we go back a long time. A few years ago, I don't know who was on this group then. We had the homeless peer review
You did.
to see how our teams were doing and how they was dealing with homeless cases. You know how so they came in and reviewed the officers,
Yeah.
they spoke to homeless people, and that was supposed to come back.
That, from that, I think was the one where we did the soldiers that came home.
Absolutely.
We gave them first
Yeah,
choice.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
so that
if somebody went into the army, they came back and they got accommodation. They went to the top of the list, so we brought
Yeah.
that in under
That was
that
good, actually.
under
That
that
was really
review.
good.
And I think that
Yeah.
it'd be could we have arrange for another peer review of that that homeless and private housing team?
I think in principle it's a good idea.
I see it back there.
There's a but, the but is only timing, only because the homelessness provision changed so much during the pandemic because of the everyone in, that we're now technically out of everyone in and technically now out of pandemic regulation. But the homelessness provision is not quite back to working as it was before.
So could we have
So
it
I'm thinking
not June, but the other end of the year, maybe the October
I
meeting
think so,
or
that's right.
yeah,
Something
yeah.
towards the sort of.
I'm not
middle of
saying
the fin-
June, I'm just
financial
like
year
on
towards
the
the end,
next year
yeah.
when you think it fits.
Yeah, because it's still not quite still.
No,
you know,
I
so it'll be
appreciate that.
difficult to compare. you
Well,
know.
we haven't got an office for people to go in yet either, so obviously there's no face to
That's
face.
true. Yeah, it's still kind of working quite.
But they picked up some really good, if you go back and look at the report that came to us,
Yeah.
you know, and at the time.
We did do some good with that.
We
didn't
did some really good work around that.
Well, homelessness update to me is an annual feature anyway, the way I'm understanding it, and it's our homelessness prevention strategy requires us to come here to report on annually. So I think, you know,
It will tie in with that.
yeah, it will tie in with that.
Okay. Has anybody else got anything that we want to load the agenda with? So we'll leave it to you then for the first agenda.
Just want to get the black shots flats down.
Well, that will hopefully be coming to you and very fast.
Do you think Joy could ceremonially actually?
It won't be taken down like that, though, will they? They were taken down by piece. Yeah, because they're they've got panels on, so all the panels will gradually be down. I know, I wanted to do that.
Well, there's got to be a paper on that, hasn't there? Because all we know is that they're coming down. We have no timeline, we have no idea, we don't know what's going there. So again, it's one of those
I think we've
things
seen
where,
plans of
Yeah.
sorts.
Yeah.
What I would like it to look like is like Chapel, because that's been so good, and the good reports on that have been good. I don't know why we can't get the same people who built that to do something. Maybe
Okay,
a better
then.
area.
so if nobody else has got anything, I'm going to close this meeting and thank you. Thanks everybody for a nice year.
Yeah.
You're working together, and I think that we actually got some good work done this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Peter.
I went